Good morning, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, maybe for someone. Welcome to today's webinar of CharIN Tuesday. I see still people joining. Maybe wait a few seconds more. So is everybody ready to? So welcome to the virtual conference, the second one in this series on the ISO norm 15118. This norm is quite important in these exciting times of electrification. It has a history from 2010, where the International Organization for Standardization and the International Electrotechnical Commission joined forces to create this norm. It's quite exceptional because it's joint forces from the automotive industry and utility industry that work together to develop this international communication standard for charging EVs. I think it's quite successful and widely adopted these days, and it's a leading standard in the major regions, as we all know, Europe, US, Central and South America. So it's rapidly picking up adoption, and we're looking forward to have some more insights from our speakers today. We welcome Dieter Grossman from Vector Informatik, Christian Hahn from Hubjects, Dr. Jörg Höher from EcoG, and Jens Schmutzler from Verisco. Besides our speakers, we also welcome the chairman of CharIN, Klaas Baklo, who wants to welcome us on today's webinar. Klaas, are you there?
Hope so.
Yes.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks for introduction, Philip, and thanks for stepping in as moderator for that fascinating panel. And that is quite important to me because the ISO 15118 is one of the core elements of the CCS technology set, and that is currently in a phase of a complete breakthrough, as we have seen applications from early last year. And so now that is the time to change over from the DIN spec to ISO. And I'm quite happy to have the top-notch experts today on that subject. And so we will have a round trip today from specification and standards and going to testing interoperability, and finally to come to opportunities on solution on that. And so that is almost all I want to say. We will see that in the market. It's time to implement, make it in a good quality. And one of the main assets is the foreseeable introduction of the plug and charge functionality, which is a major opportunity with the standard 15118. And I thank everybody who helped and is still helping to make that standard available to everybody and to let the market play to make use of these nice functionalities. And the today's subject is probably at the end, plug and charge. And in our next CharIN Tuesday next week, so we will see what V2G is going to perform, and that is all going on ISO 15118. And that is a differentiating point almost between all these technologies we see in China and Japan. So they still stick on the CAN bus, and we agreed on almost all other safety security things. But that is currently the unique selling point from my perspective to move further with CCS. So thanks to Avere and Philip for the moderation, and the panelists and speakers for today. And I'm happy to listen and switch off my micro now and hand back to Philip. Thanks to all for participating in that webinar.
Thank you, Klaas, for this nice introduction. And I'm indeed looking forward to the technical insights of the ISO norm. So we start with our first speaker, Jens Schmutzler. Welcome, Jens. I hope you're ready to start your presentation of today.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and warm welcome also from my end to the second session of the European CharIN Tuesdays. So I will focus on testing and interoperable charging solutions for the combined charging system, and I will dive into the standards that are relevant for this and dive into the current status basically that we see on the market for ISO 158 conformance testing and also its predecessor DIN 71-1. So if you can just go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so just as an introduction and to provide an overview of how complex the whole system is, on the left-hand side, you see basically just a very rough sketch of some fundamental standards that are related and core to the combined charging system. And these combine basically several domains with each other. So first of all, of course, there's plugs and outlets and inlets that need to be standardized. Charging topology, grid integration is a very important topic. Then one fundamental topic and key to interoperability is communication, also data security, and of course personal safety. So CharIN is now, from all these standards that are mostly defined in ISO and IEC, CharIN is now defining some sort of envelope that kind of forms a complete picture basically for the combined charging system and combines those relevant standards and standardization domains into one consistent system specification. In order to do so, there is a stepwise approach taken to enter the market and to ramp up the market and to prepare market rollout. So there is basically 3 steps defined. If you could go to the next slide. The first one that we are currently seeing ramping up in the market is CCS Basic, which is focusing on AC mode 3 charging and DC mode 4 charging, mostly used in case of fast charging applications with or without thermal management. And most of these systems are currently using some kind of external identification means, so some external authentication at the end, for example, through the means of RFID card authorization. The next step then would be CCS Extended according to the CharIN roadmap, and this is then introducing secure communication based on transport layer security, plug and charge feature sets, which basically providing a convenience feature to the end user by not needing anymore any sort of external authentication. And of course, also then adding smart charging functions for better grid integration and also adding value-added services to the landscape on top of the charge control and charge monitoring application that is provided through the smart charging interface. And then the next step on top of CCS Extended is CCS Advanced. This is then really for advanced applications like V2G scenarios, bidirectional power transfer for vehicle-to-X applications, and auto-connect charging devices, being it either pantograph charging for electric buses, underbody or side coupler applications for passenger vehicle cars. And also maybe the one which is coming then even later is wireless power transfer. So these are then advanced functions that are building on top of the CCS Basic and CCS Extended, but a little bit further down the road. Okay, so if you go now to the next slide. So how does this map now to the communication protocol specifications, which are key to the interoperability and also conformance testing procedures? So if you look at CCS Basic, this is currently implemented based on DIN 71-1, which was released in 2014. It was the 2nd edition that was released in that year. It's basically the predecessor of the ISO 15008 specification, which was forked out quite at some point during the drafting stage of the ISO specification. This, as we said before, provides basic functionality only for DC charging in that respect. For AC mode 3 charging, we only depend on the normal control pilot signaling. For CCS extended, then the ISO 15008-2 document comes into place, and this was also published in 2014 as edition 1, so it's actually already published for quite some time. So basically the fundamentals for secure communication, plug and charge, and smart charging functionality, as well as value-added services, is already quite long on the specification landscape, basically, and published. But we're just seeing it now coming to the market. And then lastly, for CCS Advanced, this is then targeting for ISO 15008-20 in the form of edition 1, which is targeted for sometime during the next year. So question now is, based on this step model and on this versions we will see on the market, how do we test and how do we validate corresponding products to ensure interoperability on the market? So we will now walk through basically each step and briefly review the status of each conformance testing standard corresponding to the corresponding step from the CCS basic, extended, and advanced model. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So starting off with CCS basic. So as mentioned before, DIN 71-1, published in 2014, basically introduces the complete ISO OC stack for communication technology for basic charging with DC. So it includes a home plug green PHY, MAC and PHY layer, and on top of that, an TCP version 6 communication stack with corresponding V2G messaging protocol in order to enable basic charging for DC. Correspondingly to this technical specification, this underlying specification, corresponding to a conformance test specification has been published already also in 2018. This defines basically and derives from each requirement corresponding test cases in order to provide means for conformance tests. Over time now, please go to the next slide, and within CharIN initiatives over the last year, basically, there was a CharIN implementation guides published at the beginning of 2020, both for the basically revising or kind of providing recommendations to the DIN 71-1 2014 publication, as well as to the conformance test documents. And the idea of this was to open this process to the international audience and not to keep it within only the German standardization body, but to discuss it within CharIN, let feedback and fed it back into the document. And now this is being used as an input for follow-up editions in DIN 71-1, edition 3, which is actually targeted for the end of 2020, and correspondingly conformance testing document. There will be again also the second edition, which is then targeted for sometime during 2021 after the edition 3 of DIN has been published. So please go to the next slide. Just want to give you a rough insight into a rough overview of the numbers in the conformance testing specs, so that you have an idea how complex or how many test cases are actually in this conformance test specification. So if we look at the latest document versions provided by CharIN for EV, we are talking about roughly 290 test cases. For EBSE, about 250 test cases. And on this slide, you can basically see how this revision process aligns to the original specification. So in case of the EV, slightly more than half of the test cases, 170, were directly inherited from the original DIN specification, and nearly 120 have been either updated or were newly introduced during this revisioning process. And for the EDSE, you can see it's about an even split between inherited ones and new test cases. And those both documents basically have now been part of the validation process for the CharIN conformance test systems, which are currently ongoing for DC EDSE basic, according to the CCS basic specification. Okay, so far for the CCS basic step. So let's go to the next slide and let's look into the details for the ISO 15118 and CCS extended scope. So document structure is rather similar. Major difference, of course, is that ISO 15118 is also applicable not only for DC charging but for AC charging as well. And furthermore, the document structure is split between the MEC and PHY, so the physical and data link layers, and everything on top of layer 3. And this is then correspondingly also done for the conformance test documents. So we are now talking about 2 technical specification documents, as well as 2 conformance test documents, in this case the part 4 and part 5. And in both cases, these are were published in early 2018, so they are also already available for quite some time. And if you go to the next slide, these actually, you see if, can you open the next slide? So on the next slide, you will see the complexity of the conformance test and the number of test cases has increased by nearly 50%, either for ED or EDSE. So this added complexity also for conformance test is mainly based on 3 aspects. First of all, the secure communication based on transport layer security, the plug and charge functionality, as well as smart charging with power schedules, negotiation for power schedules, as well as tariffs. So that's basically the scope of the conformance test. But what is important to understand it, these tests are already there, they are published and available. Okay, next slide, please. Looking into the CCS Advanced scope now. So CCS Advanced is now basically building on top of the same architecture like ISO 15118, -2 and -3. However, since we are now also adding another data link, physical and data link layer, so basically a Wi-Fi and wireless communication technology, it becomes clear why this document structure was split in this way. So now we have basically the PLC MEC and PHY and the wireless MEC and PHY next to each other, forming 2 independent ways how the physical layer could be represented. And then on top of that, we have the -20 document, which is currently being developed and targeted for 2021, which then defines all the messaging and basically the communication stack, protocol stack for all the use cases that are being planned to be integrated in the -20. Similarly, now the conformance test documents will be split. So if you go to the next slide, there is a little bit more detail and status provided. So for the wireless MEC and PHY, the first committee draft is already available for the corresponding Part 9 document, which defines the conformance test for wireless LAN. What is important to understand with this document, it is just a complementary testing document, which is adding tests on top of what is already being provided in the Wi-Fi Alliance. So it basically refers to all the requirements and the configuration options that are basically being defined in the underlying Part 8 document. but it is not a complete Wi-Fi compliance test. So this is then basically done in the Wi-Fi Alliance test suite, but not in the -9 document. And for the -20 document, now it's actually the structure of this document is currently being developed. So the standardization project for the conformance test of the -20 is not yet started. So there is actually no project number yet available for this project because of the fact that we are not yet in a mature state of the -20 document. And in order to ease the certification process, and because of the complexity and the number of use cases being supported by the -20 document, it is already foreseen and very likely that the conformance test documents will be split up in a way that we will have some kind of root document which defines common test basis, and then alongside this common test case document we will see further documents which then are particularly looking into several use cases. As an example, AC charging, DC charging, ACD charging, wireless power transfer, and so on. So this is the current idea in the standardization group. The exact way how it is laid out is not yet defined, as I said. As soon as the -20 document becomes mature and the conformance test document is and the project is started, this process will be defined in more detail. Okay, please go to the next slide. So let's look now how all these different communication technologies and approaches have now been consolidated in a test architecture within CharIN. So CharIN, as I mentioned before, is working on a testing and validation scheme and architecture for the CharIN CCS test system that are being audited. And all different kinds of ISO, ISC standards are currently being collected. And as we saw for the communication domain in the previous slides, test cases are selected to form a complete test specification, and then the test system vendors are basically implementing the corresponding test system, which provides a complete test suite with test case implementations in a read-only format to align with conformance test requirements, and then corresponding adapters for low-level communication, high-level communication, power transfer, security, and also fault injection are being introduced in order to cover all different domains of the combined charging system. We have only looked here now into the communication aspects, but I think already from the communication aspects, you can see the complexity on the one side, but also how rich the feature set of a combined charging system is, with one core technology underneath. And with the approach taken in CharIN, with the stepwise approach, we are now in the situation that the CharIN has already started with the validation of this CCTS devices now for the CCS basic DC EVSEs, which is now nearly finished and will be available rather soon. So please go to the next slide. I think it's already the last slide. So there is basically three key takeaways I would like to summarize here at the end, also referring basically to the step model from CharIN. So first message, CCS basic DC EVSE certification is around the corner. So we are basically in the finalizing steps to release this not only kind of test suite and test systems, but also the corresponding test process for certification. For CCS extended, I also want to provide the message that the comprehensive testing procedures for ISO 15118 plug and charge are already there, and they are already there for quite some time. So there are already vendors providing this feature set for some time, and there's also quite some maturity in this field already available. And the third aspect, looking also for CCS advanced and more like a little bit a general comment, is that Generally, EVs and the CCS charging interface will be driven by modularity and software innovation. This is basically what we have seen from the previous slides, the multitude of use cases that are being supported. Most of them need to be integrated in corresponding ecosystems and for user convenience. And the testing solutions actually will go the same route. So also key role in testing will be the software integration and testing, and also the application domain for integrating basically the multitude of options you have in one testing environment. Testing framework is one of the key challenges that the testing vendors will look into. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to contact us at Virisco. We are working in this area, providing conformance test automation frameworks and testing services in this area. And we are here to help if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your impressive presentation, Jens. It was very good to have the insights on the basic, extended, and advanced CCS. So just a short question from my side. In this complexity world that you have been explaining, what's, on your point of view, the most challenging part today in this standards?
Yeah, actually, one of the most challenging points at the moment is to coordinate the different versions. And this is actually one of the tricky parts. Of course, there is a protocol negotiation mechanism available in the standards. However, with introducing more and more versions of the standards into the field, the complexity for interoperability will rise. And to ensure user convenience and interoperable charging solutions with this system and stepwise approach, this will be definitely challenging. But I think the system outline is well done, and is over time. I think we will see a good solution how also for CCS Advanced and those larger application scopes basically will be integrated well in the interoperability testing. For this, we have also started the testing symposias and the CharIN Testable to provide additional means, not only with conformance testing, but also with kind of testing events to add some added value to the community, to basically provide opportunities to do interop testing among the several vendors from the EV landscape as well as from the infrastructure landscape.
Okay, good, thank you. And the other questions we will address at the end of the session. This brings us automatically to our next speaker, different insights and a different approach. Christian, welcome to today's webinar. Feel free to take the floor.
Okay. I will do so. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Can you hear me, Philip?
Yeah. You're
great.
There. If you can switch on your camera, then you're up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. Happy to share with you some other perspectives on our famous topic, ISO 15118 and plug and charge. And as you already can see, based on the first slide, which is shown to you right now, I've tried to, as mentioned, go into a kind of different direction and maybe not to discuss all the technical details of ISO 15118 and plug and charge, but maybe reflect a bit more what are the ongoing discussions right now in the industry. As you know, there are a lot of opinions in regards of ISO 15118 and plug and charge in place. And I would like to share with you some insights we have learned in the last years operating V2G root CA, but also operating a plug and charge ecosystem. And as mentioned, I'm happy to get your questions, happy to get your perspectives on this topic. And for the next minutes, as mentioned, I would like to share with you some some insights, some feedbacks we have got as subject, and therefore happy to discuss this topic with you in detail. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm working for Hubject. My name is Christian Hahn. I'm having the pleasure of being responsible for Hubject since 2015. And as Hubject, we are operating a so-called roaming platform. So we are connecting all the loose dots on the EV market, but also we have set up a productive solution for plug and charge. So with Hubject, you have now the possibility to already work with ISO 15118 and plug and charge, the standard we have talked about. And as mentioned, I would like to share with you some insights on this topic. So when we are switching to the next slide, there you can see that we are maybe having one issue in regards of the ISO 15118 topic, and plug and charge as well, and all the topics, all the famous topics we are talking about, and which are definitely interesting to talk about. But most standards, most technical standards, are maybe defined for audience, which is not showing the full picture, so to say, of all market participants. So quite often, yes, the standards we are talking about are created for us geeks, nerds, who of course love to discuss about bits and bytes and data exchange and security requirements. But of course, quite often, and that's unfortunately the same case for ISO 15118, we are missing a bit the specific users of such a standard. So what is with the EV users? How are they included? Of course, the business people are also a bit missed. And I assume most of you already have faced the situation in your company as soon as you would like to convince someone who is responsible for budgets to start a project on implementing ISO 15118. You need to explain first why this standard is needed and what does it bring and so on. And quite often, at least that's my experience, business people are of course not interested in the technical details. They just want to know the value. And I think the business value is sometimes, it's definitely something we need to stretch out more clearly to the market participants. And it would be great if we can find also a joint solution on this, and joint understanding on what is really the business value of ISO 15118 and plug and charge, and how can we encourage people, decision makers, to start more projects on this topic. And from my point of view, and that's something you can see on the next slide, one of the main reasons why plug and charge is such a great use case is that we enable a proper charging experience for end customers. Yes, of course, we all know since years that starting and stopping a charging station with an RFID card works okay, I would say, and also starting and stopping a charging station via a smartphone. Yeah, all good, it works. Most charging stations in Europe are now capable of using smartphone and remote authorizations. But then again, do we really think that this is already the end of the customer experience? I don't believe so. I definitely see that one of the main values, one of the main USPs of plug and charge is definitely the seamless charging experience we all are speaking about quite often. And yes, we know that companies like Tesla are offering a similar customer experience in a proper way, and this is already being in place for a long time. But also, I think most of you have seen the news over the weekend that for whatever reason, suddenly all EV models were accepted with the CCS plug here in Europe to be recharged at Tesla charging stations, and therefore clearly shows that this is one of the values again of a plug and charge and ISO 15118 standard, that this is allowing a kind of standardized communication which is being accepted by everyone in the market. And of course, and we all love to talk about additional services like smart charging, and Jens has just shared some insights on V2G and how we can test this, and other use cases like wireless charging and so on. They are all possible based on a kind of similar framework, and that's why I think plug and charge and ISO 15118 is urgently needed to be implemented by many market participants, is that we really face some kind of similar framework. And on the next slide, you can see this maybe as a very good picture. So what we are able to do based on plug and charge and based on ISO 15118 is really to ensure kind of standardization, because right now a lot of topics in the e-mobility industry are not really yet standardized. We know that a lot of protocols are being in place for the communication between the charging station and the backend systems. And yes, of course, there are ongoing standardization activities in place. That's great. But you also know, all of you know, that this takes a long time until all participants of such a working group are agreeing on a specific consensus. And therefore, I really see one of the biggest values of the ISO 15118 and plug and charge standard is really that we already have a standard in place. Philip mentioned it in the beginning during the introduction that this standard is already being approved since roughly 10 years. So therefore, it clearly shows that in some cases, we already have standards in place. We just need to use a bit more than we are doing nowadays. And I think that's definitely something we all should take into account, discussing about ISO 15118 and plug and charge and other use cases based on ISO 15118, that this is definitely ensuring a kind of standardization in the market, which is, from my point of view, urgently needed. Because now, as you all know, we are now seeing that finally the market is lifting up. Great. So we see more and more vehicles on the roads, electric vehicles on the road. We see more and more companies working on setting up charging infrastructure. But how to integrate them, how to combine them, how make them interoperable? I think that's something we're still seeing, which is not that easy. And of course, if you then take this topic on a more global level, then even more we see that there is no standard yet in place. And that's the reason why we at Hubcheck believe in ISO 15118 and plug and charge, because that's really ensuring kind of standardization in the market, especially when it's about the communication between electric vehicle and the charging station. And as mentioned, this is not only ensuring that there's a great customer experience by just plugging in and then the charging session is starting and stopping automatically, more or less, but also by ensuring that other value-added services can be realized. And again, we are right now talking about a kind of simple topic of doing a communication between a technical object, car and charging station, just to start and stop the electricity flow. But keep in mind, the more charging sessions we have in place, the more electric vehicles will go around, the more we see that we need to find a way how to regulate the charging power, because we know that the more electric vehicles are going around, the bigger the impact can be in some regions on the local electricity grid. So why not defining now a standard which we can use then again? And again, that's another reason why ISO 15118 is, from our point of view, the right way to go. But of course, there's in every case a big but, and the big but is maybe reflected in the next slide. That there are some opinions in the market stating that ISO 15118 and plug and charge is not yet a secure standard. There are some white papers going around and being exchanged and things like that. And sometimes it feels a bit like the TV series Game of Thrones, that this seems to be a very political game between different companies, different industries in the background. And I think that this is, also kind of pity that we are discussing topics which are already solved. Because of course, yes, ISO 15118 is not defining a new approach on how to establish a secure communication between different technical systems, because that was already done by a lot of other smart people years ago. ISO is just using the concepts and the technologies which were invented in other topics and is reusing this for the electric vehicle charging session. And I think that's something which is quite often missed in these discussions, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Why shouldn't we use something which is already in place, which works reliable, which we are using in our daily life, like certificates, IT certificates, and why not using them also for establishing a secure communication between a charging station and electric vehicle? And I think that's something, which I think is also somehow being discussed in the market, not in a proper way from our point of view. Because if the statement I've just did, that ISO is, let's say, a pure communication protocol, then of course everyone needs to accept also that other standards are also needed to make the whole approach more secure. And Of course, if you take this out of the discussion, then of course you could maybe say that ISO 15108 is not secure. But then you're missing the whole story, saying that the technologies we are reusing for ISO 15108 are not secure, and I think that's definitely not a right statement. And therefore, I would really like to encourage all the participants of our webinar today to really reach out to the companies who are already working on this topic. You have great speakers from great companies working on this topic and discuss the topics jointly. I don't think that this is the right approach to define a new standard, which takes a long time again, just based on a wrong assumption. But of course, frankly speaking, I'm also not saying that everything is already solved in a perfect way in regards of ISO 15108 and plug and charge. And we just got a presentation about the need for standardizing the conformity tests, for example. Totally agree with Jens. That's definitely something we need to establish more. We need to push more, because of course the whole value chain, starting from a charging station going to an electric vehicle, needs to be tested as an end-to-end test. And there we see that this seems simple to do, but in reality that's really quite complex, especially keeping in mind that there are hundreds of hardware suppliers in place who are grading charging infrastructure. There are hundreds of backend service providers in place who are developing the backend systems in the background. So therefore, I really believe that the more standardized also these topics are, the better it is for the whole industry. But talking a bit more about this trust topic, because that's a topic which is raised quite often. What does trust mean? And on the next slide, you see it again. Let's maybe spend a bit time on talking about trust. And unfortunately or fortunately, there is no standard definition of trust in place. Trust is something which is, of course, derived on existing standards and norms, but it also is something which is being shown by the specific stakeholder in the market. Because, of course, trust can be done as a technical topic, but also needs to be done based on behavior, based on communication, based on openness, for example. And that's something I would like to reflect a bit on during the next minutes, to maybe show you how we have solved the trust topic and why we think that this is a trusted approach. But again, happy to get your feedback on this as well. And if you think we are missing something, would be great to get your feedback on this. So on the next slide, you see that when it's about trust and when it's about ISO 15108 and plug and charge, there's a central trust anchor in place called V2G root CA. The V2G root CA is acting as as mentioned, as a kind of central trust anchor, and every company who is allowed to work with the V2G root CA is being seen as a trustable party in the plug and charge ecosystem. And therefore, the responsibility of the company, of the organization who is operating the V2G root CA is, of course, to analyze, to check if the company who wants to be part of this ecosystem is acting as requested, which means, of course, that the companies who want to be part of the ecosystem needs to define specific procedures, processes, structures, responsibilities, how they are handling secure information in their own company. And that's being checked, that's being audited by the V2G root CA. And that's the reason why this is also being defined as a central trust anchor. As some of you may know, Hubject is so far the only productive V2G root CA in the e-mobility space. We have set this up 3 years ago, and we are operating a root CA for the European market as well for the North American market. And therefore we are working as defined in the standard, because as you may know, the standard is also assuming that there's one V2G root CA in place for each continent, for each bigger market. But of course, we also know that as Hubject, we are a private company, that this is maybe raising some question marks. And on the next slide, you see maybe another reason why this is raising some question marks, because Hubject, as some of you again know, is a so-called corporate joint venture founded in 2012 by these great guys here on the picture. As you know, since then we have added 2 more shareholders to our joint venture, but all of them are, yeah, frankly speaking, big corporates. And of course, we know that big corporates can sometimes act very specifically. All of them have a very specific approach. But from my point of view, I'm really convinced that Hubject is neutral enough for a very simple reason, because all of our shareholders, there's no shareholder in place who is having a major stake in the Hubject joint venture. So that means we have 8 shareholders and 8 of them having roughly 1/8 of the company, which means there is no one who can dominate any kind of discussion. And therefore, this is a kind of organization which is definitely neutral, because there is no major voice in our joint venture group who's saying we need to go in this or this direction. And in addition, as you know, also these big corporates, of course, they are somehow supporting the company. They have set it up. We are working with our shareholders, of course, but none of them is directly involved in our daily business, which I think is exactly the way how it should go. And therefore, I can ensure again that there's no one in our shareholder group who's demanding something which is not seen as a neutral activity. So therefore, I really like to raise again the statement that as Hubject is having so many shareholders, yes, they are big, but there are also a lot. You can be ensured that there is no major shareholder in place who is driving our discussions in a specific direction. We are really acting as a neutral body, which is a bit similar to a kind of association or other forms of collaboration. Another topic which is shown on the next slide is that Hubject is quite open on the way we are communicating our information. So as you know, ensuring trust also means you need to have a kind of legal basis. You need to have a fundament on which your business model is based. And we are quite open on this topic. So you can go on our website, which is shown here, www.hubject.com/pki. There you can see our certificate policy, which we are having in place for our UCA. There you can even get access to more specific information. And I think that this is a very open approach, and I would love that more participants who are right now maybe having a lot of arguments against ISO 15118 would be as open as we are, because I think that's the way how it should be done, to share information, to share the relevant information openly, but also to have a strong legal fundament, strong legal basis to ensure that whatever we are doing, that this is guaranteed by the specific policies, by the specific documents you need to have in place, so that every one of our customers can see, yes, what we are doing is exactly what we have promised to. The next topic is, of course, that I'm saying this, and of course I'm Christian. How do you know that you can trust what I'm saying? And therefore we have decided to pass an external security audit, which is shown on the next slide.
Christian,
which is called ISO. Yeah.
We have to watch the time a bit. So
yeah, I have 2 minutes left, and then I'm ready with my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the topic is ISO 27001. Again, I think that's a strong statement of Hubject that we have passed such an external security audit, and I would love that more companies, the same one who are maybe acting a bit against the topic of ISO 15118, would pass similar audits, because that's a way how you can show trust, that someone externally is analyzing your organization, is checking your structures, and then is stating, yes, everything works as expected, everything works as needed. So the company is operating a secure solution, and that's what we have done already last year. And last but not least, of course, the trust of our customers is quite important on the next slide. And I think that's quite important for everyone here in this round. As we are already having the pleasure of working with a lot of companies, we really would like to invite all of you to discuss internally if and how this standard can improve your business model. As mentioned, it's not that easy to discuss this internally, but it's definitely worth the discussion. And I really recommend to do this quite soon, because right now a lot of tenders are in place, a lot of new projects are being started, and I'm quite sure that this is the right time also to take ISO 15118 and plug and charge into account. And last but not least, please be invited whenever you're hearing a statement about ISO 15118 on the next slide. Please reach out to the ones who have some insights in this topic. I know that there are a lot of rumors going on, and our recommendation is really, please reach out to the ones who already have implemented solutions on this topic. Please reach out to the ones who already have some experience on this topic, and not just rely on general statements which are not specific and maybe even not reliable. So therefore, happy to invite you to reach out to Hubshade, but any other company who's pushing this topic, because that's the way how we should solve topics, not just doing statements, but really showing our approach by solutions. And that's exactly what I would like to invite you and discuss with us if and how we can do so. Okay, I think that's all. We have one last slide. Yeah, congrats. Another ISO presentation. As mentioned, I've tried to do a kind of different approach, not focusing on the details. Therefore, a lot of experts are still on the call who will share with you more details. But I think it's also important really to discuss some of the topics which are being discussed in the market in a specific way, because again, I'm convinced that we only can create a better EV industry by working jointly. So let's do so.
Thank you, Christian. Very good to have your insights on indeed a different approach. I really kept in mind of your presentation, don't reinvent the wheel again. I think it's quite important to keep this in mind, because we have still a long way to go, but it should go straight forward, and not we should not be distracted by other things, and keeping the focus on that part.